Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Shadow of the Erdtree. Today I'm attempting a somewhat silly task to put together a pile of the best weapons of the game into one tier list, comparing them and ranking them against each other. Because there's so many great choices though, I have limited myself to 20 weapons total to keep this functional. For example, while I do have 6 C tier choices in this, there is a bunch more we could include, so I've just picked for C tier the ones I like for the different purposes and how they contrast one another. In any case, this is a PvE focused list, and if the weapon is even mentioned today, then it is one of the strongest things you can use in the entire game. So with that said, let's begin. Starting as always from the bottom, at C tier, we have the Magma Worm Greatsword, or Scale Sword as I should call it. This one is just phenomenal. As a curved greatsword, it has pretty damn reliable reach. It has a unique moveset where you're kind of doing this guillotine slam, whether you're doing the jump attack, the charged heavies, or of course the Ash of War that spreads this lava out, and you can kind of pull through it as a follow-up. It's weird. In any case, it was always a decent weapon. A mix of fire and physical, is very buffable, with great stagger potential, and a cool playstyle. Why it's so much better in the DLC though is the new talisman. This Dread talisman increases the damage you deal with magma related Ashes of War by 14%. That's 1% less than Shadow of Alexander, a meta pick. Combining the two then, this is actually really increasing its damage. Then you have another new talisman in the form of the two-handed sword talisman, so when we're two-handing this weapon and hitting with it, it's even stronger. And obviously there's the new wondrous physics stuff and the Rakshasa armor. There's a lot of new ways to enhance a weapon like this, and so the result is just really reliable, really strong hits. Really the big downside to this is the Ash of War's overly long and you're in a very exposed animation compared to many that's going to be on this list. So while the output is there, the use of it can be dangerous at times. There's definitely more reliable damage. Like for example, the backhand blades, another new weapon in the DLC. In short, these are worse curved swords just for the moveset. Curved swords in power stance have a better running attack, jump attack. In general, they have higher DPS potential to spam it out. But the backhand blade type is nice for gap closing. It kind of moves you forward through the combo and I really like that. But why this is so stand out is specifically the Ash of War. The new one, Blind Spot, which has you have an iframe dodge and then thrust punish. Using that to evade an attack while using your own is incredible counterattack damage, putting you in the right position to immediately punish with a light attack combo or whatever. With this being a mix of dex and the potential bleed, especially when buffing them up with something like Bloodflame Blade, and the DPS potential is ultra high, heavily relying on that blind spot evade, meaning you're like a fly buzzing around the boss, never stopping attacking. That's what's so good about this, and why it deserves a mention in this video. Compared to that then, we also have the falx, which is definitely a better moveset, but with a much weaker playstyle behind it. With the curved swords and power stance, you get both of them. It's very lightweight, which is really nice. And then yeah, you can benefit from the successive hits and the bleed buildup of running attacks, jump attacks, standing combos. Why it's held back is the fact that you're not going to be able to scale its output nearly as high as another weapon or weapons we're going to talk about in this video that do the same thing. However, it has a unique Ash of War that is really good, that has you do that double swipe forward, and then there's a heavy follow-up, a super long successive hit combo. This is super effective for building up successive damage, for building up bleed, and maximizing your burst. It does leave you exposed though, and it needs skill and timing to actually land, and in this DLC where punish windows are short, can be difficult to do. The potential is there, but it is outscaled compared to other weapons we'll talk about as we go. Also new in the DLC, and definitely deserves a mention, is the Claws of Night, which essentially are one of the best claw picks you could do for the whole game. There's a little detail about them being semi-corporeal, which is nice, meaning you can't really block them, but mainly you're doing the standing light attack combo with really good range because these are long claws, thanks to the nice DPS that I'll get with successive hits and the bleed buildup. While it does come with a unique kind of Smith script style heavy attack where you throw the blades, you're never going to use that. Instead, you use the kind of shotgun blast of the Ash of War, which has insane damage fall off at any distance. So as a safe punish, that's really nice. Damage and bleed build up, easy to throw out, definitely good, but the damage is very low unless you're right up against the target. So it kind of forces you to use the Ash of War at shotgun range and the standing light attack combo at shotgun range, meaning you need to be very good on your evades to maintain the really high DPS potential these weapons have. Even though they're obviously really high in potential, it does require a lot of skill from the player. Unlike maybe one of these weapons here, the Giant's Crusher. As a top tier strength option, this is just a classic. With its unique heavy attack doing a front slam flip, you can absolutely smash a target for ginormous damage. Combine that with something like Royal Knight's Resolve, or maybe you go with Endure so you can ignore what the enemy's doing and poise through. You're going to be hitting hard very hard every time you use a heavy attack. But that's all you're going to be doing, because that's how you maximize this weapon. Hell, the normal moveset's basically the same thing anyway, singular bonks. It is not a versatile weapon by any means, but what it does do is bonk, and it does do it really well. Lastly, I also want to mention in C tier the Great Stars as an alternative kind of strength choice. Although you can run it in different ways with like Blood Flame Build Up and Occult, it comes with this cool passive where every time you deal damage, you get a little heal. So successive hits and Ashes of War that allow for a lot of that actually heals you quite a bit. Nice for general gameplay, but also can be clutched during a boss fight. In any case, its scaling isn't insane. The AR is not the highest, but it's a nice hard-hitting, high stagger potential weapon that can run a load of good options in terms of the affinity and of course the Ashes of War you're using. So it's a really good strength all-rounder. So again, definitely deserves a mention. But this brings us up to B tier, where we now have the Bolt of Gransax. Down in B tier compared to where it may have been before in A tier, this pretty much comes down to the recent nerf to the Ash of War. They slightly reduce the damage it does, and you can definitely feel it. It's a shame because there's a new talisman called the Smithing Talisman that increases thrown damage with all the new thrown stuff in the DLC, and yet for some reason it doesn't affect the Bolt of Gransax and its obvious throw Ash of War. Maybe they'll change that and it can counter the nerf so this feels better and maybe you could go back up into A tier. But for now, when you're heavily relying on the Ash of War, it is weaker than it was before, but still very good. A super long range punish, lightning without needing faith, a very good dex weapon in general, whether you're two-handing the spear itself or power stancing two of them is even better for jump attacks and running attacks. It clearly still has great potential and is a great weapon, but it is obviously at the same time weaker than it was for the main reason you use it, the Ash of War. Also in B tier then, we have the greatsword. One of the best strength weapons in the game, one of my favorites in general. It's the most versatile strength weapon you could think of. Whether you're using classic picks of Lion's Claw or Giant's Hunt, or one of the new options in the DLC, allowing you to do this spiral spin with gravity magic, a very hard-hitting strength weapon that's ticking really quick for damage. Successive hits, bleed procs on a strength weapon. It's kind of awesome. It's a hard hitter, good stagger potential, great range behind it, and a load of ways you can run it in weird, very effective ways with the Ash of War options. But it doesn't have insane DPS in any of them, it's just really versatile and good. Not so versatile, but very effective, is the Bloodhound's Fang though, that I put in B tier. This is a classic that a lot of people swear by. Arguably, it's one of the strongest early game weapons you can get in the whole game, because you can get it nigh on immediately. The result is a long curved greatsword that deals great damage on hit, has really good range because of its length, bonuses to jump attacks because of it being a Bloodhound weapon, and it's super buffable with something amazing like Blood Flame Blade, and its Ash of War has iframes during it. It's a kind of uppercut hit that sends you backwards, you dash in with the iframes, and then a big smash. This can be awkward at the best of times because, you know, backward dash in, if the boss moves or it's very agile, can be hard to hit, but still, it's an iframe, heavy hitting Ash of War that's always going to be really good. But it doesn't have insane DPS, it's just a reliable great option, much like the greatsword. And also, the nagakiba, the final weapon in B tier. This is a top tier pick for dex by comparison to say the greatsword for strength. As a katana, you've got the longest one in the game, so it's got insane range for its attacks. The katana moveset is great variety for dealing all kinds of situations. Its base damage is good and keen, but you can run it in occult or other options because it does come with base bleed buildup. It's a buffable weapon, so of course Blood Flame Blade if you're able to do that. And there's this massive list of some of the best Ashes of War in the game that it can of course run. Whether that's your ranged options, combo options, something simple and really effective in this DLC, the Blood Blade. That's because there's the new Ansbach set that'll actually enhance that Ash of War. There's new consumables like the Sacred Bloody Flesh that enhance your bleed buffs. There's just so many ways you can run this in very meta, very effective methods. And arguably, if you're thinking about bleed, it's never been better than in this DLC. Again, like the Greatsword and the Bloodhound's Fang though, it doesn't have insane damage or DPS per se, but it's very reliable, easy to use, and so it's very easy to like. But that now brings us to A tier, starting with the Star Fists. Whether you're running in strength or occult, you're basically doing one thing and one thing only with these funny weapons, and that is charged heavies. The fist weapons have this really effective, really quick charged heavy attack, which can be comboed into another charged heavy. These come out shockingly quick, and yet despite that, have incredible stagger build-up behind them. So a build that's all about dealing charged heavies, breaking posture, landing criticals, getting new benefits from those criticals with a new talisman that does that in this DLC. There's very simple and very effective playstyle and options for it. Ultimately all of them are charging heavies and that's basically it though. and I do think that's very bland and repetitive and boring, but there's no denying that it's really effective and a lot of people love it because of that. Just be wary of its tiny range, which keeps it down in A tier for sure. Also in A tier though, previously maybe an S tier weapon, Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear, which in the recent patch of the launch of the DLC, they reduced the status buildup of its Ash of War, and in the past they've also reduced the range of that Ash of War, not that that's a big problem in a boss fight. Essentially, you must all in on this weapon. You need to maximize every damage buff possible because you're going to have to leave yourself very exposed to do the Blood Boon ritual. Getting the first tick off and then rolling is completely fine for some easy status buildup, but of course, ideally, you want to do the full triple stab into the air, and to do that in this DLC where there's short punish windows, it is difficult. And while there is definitely new ways to enhance bleed buildup, of course, the status loss on the nerf directly to this weapon will be felt. So it's not what it once was, but it's also better in certain ways, and as a base weapon, as a great spear, it's got a good range and stagger buildup behind that, especially if you've just buffed it up with one of the blood boons. So still very good, but also not what it was not too long ago. Next for A tier then, we have the Sword of Night and Flame, which you might argue for higher or lower for. I think A is a fair ranking for it. It used to be the king of the PvE game, where you would just absolutely spam the lasers into targets, because it comes with a stance Ash of War. Light attack for the magic beam, or heavy attack for the fire arc. The fire arc can be useful for dealing with multiple enemies, or stagger buildup, or a quick punish, but mostly you of course want to do the laser beam to maintain great DPS. This leaves you super exposed though, there's not really any protection during it, but because you can do it from medium range, it is easy to get that punish off. On agile targets, that's definitely a difficult thing, but there are many big bosses in this DLC. So it's still super good for maintaining great magic DPS, and you have the option of fire if you ever come across an enemy that's weak to it. But I just think it's in a really reliable, good place at this point. Lastly for A tier then, we have the Mariah's Executioner Sword, a great sword that pretty much comes down to its Ash of War as an arcane weapon that's not about bleed. Instead, it's all in on that successive hit build because you're kind of corkscrewing into a target with the Ash of War, dealing many ticks of damage. It's able to build up incredible burst, which is something we can't deny, but because it holds you in place to do that, again in this DLC where bosses are so agile or short punish windows, that can be awkward. It'd be really nice if we could cancel this even earlier than, you know, what we have right now. Still, the DPS is very respectable if you can get it off, especially if you get it off multiple times where you're still receiving that successive hit build-up. The potential is still absolutely there for this one, but it's entirely the Ash of War. The base hits of the weapon are not great. It doesn't have incredible range or amazing stagger, it's just a great sword, but no one can deny the power of that Ash of War. But as we come to S tier, the weapons become a little bit more than just the Ash, starting with the classic Dark Moon Greatsword, which technically was nerfed in the patch leading into the DLC. What they did is they actually made it so that the projectile of the heavy attack arc has much less stagger buildup as a ranged projectile. But they also increased the melee hit, so if you do it at shotgun range, you hit with the sword and the projectile at the same time, then you're good to go. So this simply makes the weapon not as good for safe range punish as it used to be, but you know, the output's the same. Nothing about that's really changed. But it is the same weapon with, you know, magic arcs for no FP, just heavy attacks and stamina. It's still got frost buildup. It's still super effective for a high intelligence build. It's super reliable in general exploration because of that, and it's incredible for just spamming charge attacks into bosses in any punish window, whether you do that from range and safety or ideally up close to break the posture. It's still really good, and it's still definitely S tier. Also still really good is the Death's Poker. The weapon itself is honestly not good, probably like C tier at best maybe. It's just a weak greatsword, and this is not why you're using it. Obviously it's all about the Ash of War Ghost Flame Ignition. You press it and you get this orb of frost fire. Then you can choose to light attack to send out a kind of arc of frost fire on the ground, dealing ticking buildup of frost. That status buildup is insanely fast. The damage and ticks that it deals is super good. Once you get the frost proc, it's even better. And then outside of that, instead of doing that, you could do the heavy attack follow up on the Ash to do an explosion. That's good for knocking down normal enemies, but not great in boss fights. So you're pretty much just doing the light attack frost fire on the ground, maintaining that on the target so that it's standing in it, and then dealing damage around that, maybe by buffing yourself up more, or debuffing the enemy, or using the basics of the greatsword that are okay in between. But our whole goal is to maintain and reapply that frostfire on the target on the ground, and watch as it absolutely melts health bars. It's still stupidly good, just specifically the Ash of War. In contrast to that then, we have the Wing of Astel, another intelligence weapon in S tier. Simply put, you're not going to get as brilliant stagger potential, spamming this Ash of War with most any other weapon. It comes out quick, spreads this magic arc out, and then that explodes. While that's about to happen, you can send another one and do this infinite chain of ridiculous build-up of damage. The DPS itself is insane, but again, the stagger build-up leading to free criticals because of that is super good too. So its Ash of War is amazing, but then it's a curved sword. So you could run it in power stance with bandits or another one like here, maybe work in some extra free frost build-up like I do in this case, enjoying the successive hits of those weapon types. Or you could use the heavy attack of the weapon, which is a completely FP-less magic arc, but you can combo it, leading to up to 4 of these projectiles back to back. This is insane for, general gameplay, quick punishes, open world. It's such a versatile weapon. It's one of the best weapons in the game, absolutely. Probably the best intelligence weapon if I had to pick just one. But there is one weapon in S tier that isn't intelligence, and that's the bloodfiend's arm. A colossal weapon that has hilarious bleed build-up for some reason. Essentially what you're doing is you're running it in bleed or occult and maximizing your arcane. Then with an Ash of War to enhance the output, something like Royal Knight's Resolve, or you could run Endure and just ignore what the enemy's doing, you are bonking with charged heavy hits. And if not that, maybe a jump attack or something like that, but that is all you're doing. The result is shockingly high bleed buildup, super good stagger potential, and ultra hard hitting hits, where I am hitting these bosses and killing them in literally 3 hits. It was nerfed in a recent patch to have slightly less scaling and power behind the status buildup, but as I've said various times, it's barely noticeable. It's still one of the best weapons in the game, clearly. And it's so easy to use because all you're doing is charged heavies and maybe a jump attack. But above that, in S+ tier, we of course have the Blasphemous Blade, which you might think is not as good because of that patch that we went into the DLC with, where they reduced the poise potential on it and also the knockdown on just normal enemies. But genuinely, that doesn't matter if they didn't do anything to it. It's still super good. 10% of your max life heal on every Ash of War use, and the lifesteal on Killing Blow is incredible. But it's actually stronger in this DLC. Just like I talked about with the Magma Scale Sword earlier, the Magma Enhancing Talisman, the Dread one, is a 14% damage increase to this Ash of War. So that, combined with Alexander's, and then say the new armor like Rakshasa's, the wondrous physic options, there's the blood sucking for a damage increase, there's also the one that increases fire damage. Straight up, this has never done more damage than now, and it was already arguably the best weapon in the game before these apparent new item buffs. It's kind of crazy that it's been the king of this game for so long, and in the DLC only got better. It's honestly so easy to use. So S+ for sure, just like our last 2 weapons, the Bandit's Curved Sword and the Scavenger's Curved Sword, which, you can use 2 of each or mix and match them, whatever. They're basically the same thing. A curved sword with the curved sword in power stance moveset, allowing for incredibly quick, successive damage with good AR behind it. Ideally ran in occult and maximizing your arcane to maximize the bleed buildup. You combine that of course with seppuku and you're doing ridiculous damage per hit and bleed buildup and all that good stuff. Between successive hits and bleed procs and so on, you're able to achieve some of the highest DPS with the bleed build in the game undeniably. And it's so easy because all you're doing is pretty much jump attack spamming once you're buffed up. Admittedly, it's a bit of a chore to buff these up before the fight. It takes a bit of time, and those buffs don't last a long time either. But because they're so strong, you just will. Compared to the Blasphemous Blade, they're a lot less convenient to use in general, but you can't deny their extreme DPS. But because you can only get one Scavenger Curved Sword, running 1 of each is a very viable option. And clearly, it really doesn't matter. But yeah, there you have it. Our top 20 weapons compared to one another. Again, be aware that there's even more C tier weapons I could have included in this. So if there's any you think could have been mentioned, feel free to drop it in the comments. Maybe the suggestion will be used by someone. If this video has been useful or just interesting though, please be sure to drop a like. And until next time, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thank you for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.